I was the worst salesperson in the company. They said to me, Mark, if you don't sell in the next couple of days, we're going to have to fire you. First clients came in, and I said to them, you're going to spend $10,000, you're going to give me a credit card, and you're going to give me a big hug at the end of it. And for 5 hours, I kept assuming it. And then when we'd stopped, I said, Marco, you can stop now. I want to buy.
You know, and I know for my audience, a lot of people listening are people that are getting their asses kicked. Like, that's one of the reasons people listen to this show, because they're like, oh, yay, there's hope for me because I'm getting my ass kicked right now. So I always want to know, like, how and when did it start to shift? You know, what was the moment for you?
Yeah, I mean, basically it's to do with pain. It's a trigger. So the more pain that you can deal with, and it accumulates and accumulates. I mean, my pain accumulated for 15 years because I was running away all the time, running away from home, running away from bullies. And so one day I couldn't run away anymore. So I had a choice to make. I could have tried to get away, or I could stay and fight. But it wasn't like a conscious choice. It was an instinct.
Yeah.
So there was 20 kids beating me up in this garage at my so-called friend's house, punching me, kicking me, passing me around in a circle, that kind of thing, right? And punches got harder, the laughing got harder, and eventually I just saw red. And the next thing I remember was running down the fucking road and going, come on, you motherfuckers, you come on! And that was what I was doing, man. And that moment was one of the best moments of my life because it was the first time I'd actually basically won at something that I was up against without any tools, because the tools I had were instinctual because of all the years I was on the street, homeless, managing, surviving. I just basically lashed out with all I'd got. And, you know, there was nothing to lose anymore because I didn't want to have any more pain that I was feeling. And that was the trigger. And as Tony Robbins said, the two triggers in life is pain and inspiration. Pain or inspiration, those are the two triggers. Everything in between there is not going to motivate you to get out of your comfort zone.
You know, I've never really heard it, I think, put that way, that moment when you reach that breaking point where you just can't take any more pain.
Yeah.
In many cases, I would imagine this is true for a lot of other people, is for many, it's the first moment that you actually want something bad enough to start fighting for it.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that endure pain.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, life is a struggle. But actually, if all you're doing is enduring it, you're not struggling. You're just sort of passively accepting.
You're tolerating and accepting your situation. And that's not winning. That's failing, isn't it? That's losing.
Yeah. So how old were you when you decided to hit back?
Well, that was 15. I was 15. As I said, it was not a conscious choice. I couldn't take any more pain because I was living in a town. I had no role model, no mentor. My stepdad was a complete dick. That meant he used to beat my mum up. He was a truck driver. There was no influence there. There was no influence for me to get better. And I hated school because I just didn't find it relevant. I didn't find that academic syllabus. I knew quite early on it wasn't going to serve me.
Yeah.
You know, and I've read on your Instagram, I save people from the education system. Well, that, you know, you couldn't say it better because that was not going to save me. That was going to entrap me. Yeah. So I had no problem leaving school at 15 and getting 4 jobs because I'd been on the street before with my mum. I knew how to survive. So I had skills to survive on the street. And I did that for like 5 years. And I got offered a job, when I was 21 in direct sales. I was selling timeshare, which was the hardest freaking thing to sell because I was selling something that was intangible and I was very shy. I had no sales skills at all, but I didn't want to go back to that kind of scarcity that I had before. So that was, again, the pain was the motivator. But for the first time, I had a goal where I wanted to make a certain amount of money and I wanted to get out of that town and I wanted to travel and experience life more. So really 21 was the first time that I actually set any goals. And what happened is that I was the worst salesperson in the company. I didn't sell anything for 6 weeks. And they said to me, Mark, if you don't sell in the next couple of days, we're going to have to fire you because you're not getting any sales. So, you know, what do you do? So I walked 5 miles home every day from where I used to live, which was, by the way, 6 months behind in rent, to the office. And my normal question was, why can't I sell anything? Why am I such a loser? Perhaps I should go back and be a cleaner. That was my internal narrative all the time. So I went back after being told I was going to get fired. top salesperson approached me just out of the blue. And he said, Marco, I know you're in pain. I know you think you can't do this, but you actually can do this because I used to be like you. And I said, no freaking way you were like me, because he's the top guy.
Mm-hmm.
He said, yeah, I used to be homeless. I had no money. And then something changed. I met someone. They gave me a book. They gave me some coaching. And I want to give you a book. I want you to read it. And I want you to just keep reading it until you get the message. Now, at that point, for me, my question had been asked, because I changed my question to, how can I be successful? For that second day, I changed it to, how can I be successful? I kept asking it and shouting it down the road.
And what was it before? Would you say?
The question before was, why am I such a loser? Why am I not selling?
Yeah. Okay. Huge. That's such a huge thing. I wanted to be clear about it.
Yeah. So that shift in the question was the huge deal breaker in a positive way, which completely changed the universe I was in. And the top salesperson approached me. That never happened before. So that's down to asking the right question. So I got that book. I went home and I read it 8 times. 8 times. I didn't go to sleep that night. And I literally sprinted to the office because I was so on fire with belief and electricity for the first time in my life. I knew actually I was in control. As soon as I read that book, and soon as that question answered, I knew that I had to take responsibility for it. I couldn't blame anyone anymore. It wasn't their fault. It was my fault. So I went to the office, ran to the office. And for the first time, the manager says, wow, what's wrong with you, Marco? Is something wrong? I said, no, I just feel really good today. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I got there. My first prospects came in, first clients came in, and they were both blind. She was blind, he was blind, and they had a guide dog. So I'm thinking to myself, they can't even see timeshare. How the freaking hell am I going to sell them it when they can't see me? Right? It was a massive challenge, but I think it was the right challenge for me, because I said to them, so listen, I don't care you've got a disability. I am going to sell you this product in 5 hours. You're going to sign up. You're going to spend $10,000. You're going to give me a credit card, and you're going to give me a big hug at the end of it. Right? It's the first time I'd ever done that intentionally.
And to be clear, you said that out loud right up front.
Right up front.
Talk about assuming the sale. I love it.
Yeah. And of course, what happened was, no, we're not going to do that. We're not. Right. We have to go. So the defenses are up straight away, but I just kept assuming it all the time. And for 5 hours, I kept assuming it. And then when we'd stopped, he grabbed my arm. I said, Marco, you can stop now. I want to buy. So he gave me his credit card and said, put $10,000 there. You were right. We love it. It's the best thing we've ever heard in years. We can't wait to take the holidays. And that moment for me was like, oh my God, that was the pivotal moment in my life, which completely transformed my future to my past. Because the first thing I asked him was, why did you buy from me? Because I was like so shocked. And they said, well, this is your first sale. I said, yeah, it's my first ever sale. And I shouldn't say that because we're so naive, but at that time, it was like an amazing thing that happened, because it was the first money I'd ever made for myself. So they said, after they calmed down, they said, listen, the reason we bought from you is because you transferred your belief to us, which made us believe what you were saying. We would have bought it hours ago, but you wouldn't stop talking. So that was a massive moment for me, and everything changed from then.
Yeah, transference of belief. I'd like to kind of take a beat on that moment for you, because again, I when I started this show, it was kind of like, I'm sure you're familiar with Napoleon Hill and Think and Grow Rich and that whole book. That was Napoleon Hill took decades of his life and went out and tried to seek the answers to success. Fortunately, I live in a world where I can just get on Zoom with hundreds of people. I don't have to go live with Andrew Carnegie for 10 years, but it's kind of been the same type of journey. And what you just described, I've said this in multiple videos, that people want a certain result, a certain quality of life, a certain amount of money, a certain set of opportunities, whatever. And obviously it's important to know where you want to go, but you also have to be really, really honest about where you are. And depending on where you are, I kind of have a formula of like, there's a few different ways to get started. Look at, if you have $1 million, then frankly, go buy a multifamily apartment, go buy 4 multifamily apartment complexes and scale from there. Right. But if you got nothing, if you're homeless on the street, or you're just trying to, find your next loaf of bread, you got to learn to sell.
Yeah.
I say this all the time. There is no skill other than maybe being one of the 100 best basketball players in the world or something that, you know, is exceptional like that you can go acquire that can more rapidly and dramatically transform your situation, regardless of your starting point, than the ability to sell. Or even if selling is not, let's say for some reason, not possible for you, like maybe you're mute or you can't speak or you have some kind of impediment, understanding sales mechanics and sales psychology enough that you can get involved in sales processes, whether it's as a copywriter or some kind of a direct response marketer or an editor or something that facilitates sales. Sales has such a bad rap. Sales is the beacon of hope for hundreds of millions of people who don't think they have any options.
Yeah, it is. When it boils down to what's going to get you out of a tricky situation in the fastest time possible, that is really the skill that you need to know. And that's saved my ass. That has saved my ass so many times. But, you know, when you become successful, a lot of successful entrepreneurs forget that. Yeah. And they stop selling and they get comfortable and they start losing what they've achieved in the first place. And they wonder why they lost it, you know?
Yeah, that plateau. and it's funny because you reach a certain point, and I'm sure you've wrestled with this. I wrestle with this because I've kind of gotten to a point where like there's no desperation that drives me. I have everything a human needs, not just financially, but like, you know, love, and I have a great family, and, you know, people respect what I do, and all the Maslow's hierarchy. I've kind of like checked those boxes. But the day you get complacent really is the day you stop selling. Yeah. Or having something that you believe in selling. That's when most people plateau. So okay. So let's accelerate through the story. I mean, you sell that thing. Clearly I'm assuming you became one of the top sales guys in that organization after that. That's kind of how the journey goes, right?
That's pretty much how the story unfolds. I became the youngest sales manager there, did all the sales. And then I did so well that I got offered jobs all over the world. Yeah, doing what I was doing. And I got headhunted by several big companies, and one of them was in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. And it was a public company that wanted me to run it with my partner there. It was amazing money. And my family my daughter was 6 months old. It was the right thing to do. So we moved to Malaysia in 97. And it was not doing very well at all, the company. And then the Asian economic crisis came, George Soros destabilized everything, and then the company couldn't pay me. So I'm going, okay, I'm up against it again here. What am I going to do? Go home, or do I do something here that can change or move the needle in the right way? Mm-hmm. So what I did is I didn't sell, I innovated. So I innovated a timeshare product from 7 days to a points product where you could go for like 1 or 2 days so people could afford it. Mm. And then I hired 2,000 salespeople, recruited them from scratch, trained them all myself and the telemarketers. So I had about 3,500 people at the peak. And I turned that company into a $2 billion company in 3 years doing that. And at one point I was doing 6,000 sales a month, which was incredible. It was the world sales record. So, you know, I did that for so long, did really well, but I was still an employee. And the politics in that company was incredibly difficult because there's always someone that wanted your job. There's always someone, you know, trying to get in the way. So what happened was then is that one day, as I'm giving a motivational talk, I collapsed and had a heart attack in the office.
Okay. And I didn't see that coming. How old were you?
30.
Okay. So that's, maybe we learn a little bit of one of the downsides of having pain as a fuel source and having to drive that hard.
Yeah. The problem with that was the pain was toxic because I was so addicted to success and afraid of losing my job that I'd go in early, come back late, and I wouldn't eat properly, didn't go exercise, drank, all that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, I recovered and they said, you've got to slow down, blah, blah, blah. And when I came out of hospital, I found out my wife was having an affair with my best friend. Okay. Which was more painful than the heart attack. because I'd known those guys for 10 years, both of them. So the emotional fallout from that was probably the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. Because the two people I supposedly loved completely betrayed me. So I was really emotionally messed up then. And I decided, I left my wife, obviously, spent a long time on my own. And I decided that I didn't want to have a boss anymore. So I left the company and just did everything on my own. I lost most of the money I made from the company because I lost it on the stock market. I didn't understand it. I got greedy, put money in stock I didn't understand. And then eventually went back to my wife, which was not really, it was a mistake in a way because I knew I shouldn't have done it, but I did it for the kids. Because I didn't have a dad and I wanted them to have a dad. So that was what happened. And then slowly, it took me about 5 years, but then I built my life back up and became a consultant, did motivational speaking. And then I started a really transformational startup in 2008.
Hey, sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to let you know you can get a free copy of my book, The Millionaire Shortcut, which shows you the fastest way to become a millionaire in the new economy. And there's a special link just for this episode in the description. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode.
So again, thank you I want to pause right there. This idea, it's kind of a trope in entrepreneurial hero narratives around, I had nothing, school of hard knocks, forged by adversity, and then I have some sort of crucible period. And a lot of times there's more than just one. It's not as simple as just a plot formula. But, again, I've had it. I'm kind of just coming out of one, to be honest. I think we have these again and again, but these periods where your back gets against the wall, and then you call on the strength that you developed through the adversity of your past, and you exert yourself in a way that I think, and I imagine you got this at the time, and I've gotten this, and most of the people I interview get this, like, man, this guy's on fire. Like, how does this guy do it? How does this guy sustain that level of energy and output? And what, and man, I want the result, but I don't know if I want to work that hard. And, it's this level of output. And then you reach a different type of crisis where it's truly not sustainable.
Yeah.
And there's some kind of a collapse or a break or a dissonance that has to be reckoned with. And then you kind of
there's also other people involved. There's other stakeholders.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you become ultra successful, a lot of people get jealous. You know that, Jeff.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you have experienced that so much in terms of haters and trolls and all that kind of shit, right?
Oh yeah. Go read my Instagram comments.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So I have had lots of that. But when it really started to really kick in, it really upset me deeply because the people I thought liked me were now hating me. And that was a fucking hard learning curve to deal with,
So I have two questions. One is, and when people, I'm sure you get, like myself, a lot of people whose backs are against the wall, or they seem like they're really in a hard spot. And they're kind of saying, well, hey, what should I do? And my answer always has a level of honesty that, listen, you're probably, whatever you're going to have to do to solve this problem, you're going to discover levels of exertion and intensity and drive that you've maybe never even had to realize about yourself before, because it's really, really, really fucking hard.
Yeah.
To dig out.
Absolutely.
And, but then also as you get older and more mature, you recognize that if that's the only advice you give, you're setting people up for something that's unsustainable. And so I'm curious for you, how many of these cycles have you been through? And have you developed a way now where you can go as hard as you need to go to do these really, it's really hard to create something new in the world and kind of defy the status quo of what currently exists. But at the same time, have you gotten better at doing it in a way that's more sustainable?
It's a good question. I guess I'd have to say yes to that. And part of that yes is realizing that you are in a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And you are in a trope. And you kind of notice the patterns. So you're able to deal with those patterns more effectively, aren't you? And productively. Instead of like, oh my God, I don't know how to do that, is you learn how to do it or you hire someone that can do it. So, it becomes easier. So the cycle becomes shorter. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And the recovery from the cycle becomes shorter too. So you can iterate into the next one faster and without loss of momentum. I love what you said, delegation. Do you do it? Would you say that you've learned to actually conserve energy so that you can play a longer game, or are you still just give it your all until you tucker out and have to rest for a while?
No, I've learned to work a bit smarter than that because I'm 53 now, so I cannot move physically like I used to do at 25, although I think I can. I really can't, So now it becomes a stage where you've got to trust your intelligence more. You've got to trust your brain. You've got to trust your mind. You've got to trust what you already know. And you've got to trust that greatest asset, which is your ability to learn and synthesize new information. So, and of course, part of that is that you've got to also reach out to the right people that can coach you. Because a lot of people think, oh, you only get a coach once in your life. No, you get coaches at different levels.
Yeah.
Right. So I didn't realize that when I was younger, but now I have coaches now at this level because I need to know what they know to take me to the next level. And it's really simple, but so many people just don't understand that. And they actually don't value how pivotal having a coach is.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. I literally just in the last few months got myself a new coach. 3 years ago when I started Entre, the business I have now, which is I say this with an asterisk because maybe somebody's going to challenge me on it, but I'm pretty sure we're the largest non-venture capital backed private education company in the world right now. Yeah. And I started it in 3 years ago under the auspices of a coach who said, here's the plan, here's the action plan, here's the execution strategy, go, go, go. Come on, you can do this, Jeff. Yeah. And I've done it. And now but now I'm at a new place where I'm kind of cycling through a more of a balancing and a recovery phase of like, okay, I want to be able to sustain energy longer. And I have a new coach who's essentially a neurological counselor to help me heal the fraying ends of my brain because I push so hard. I literally singe the edges of my brain, my neurons. And she's like, okay, Jeff, we're going to teach you how to bathe and clean your brain every day so that you can do this for decades, right? But that's a totally new type of coaching that wouldn't have made any sense up until now, right?
Well, that's very new. I would say it's not new, but it's kind of more accessible now, isn't it, as well, more relevant?
Yeah,
yeah. You probably wouldn't have got a coach like that anyway. But now you can.
And for one, I wouldn't have been able to afford it.
Yeah.
But also, to the remote technology and it just wouldn't have made sense. And I think that's really important, and it's why I love this show because I interview people at all these different stages in the journey. But typically I'm talking to guys and gals that are at least in their 40s, often in their 50s. We've been through enough stuff, right?
Yeah.
That we've come out the other side. And what you start to see is there really are, it's just like great fiction. There's only a few stories. They're told, the characters change and the details change, but there really is this entrepreneurial kind of hero's arc to this story.
Arc. Absolutely.
And it starts with getting your ass kicked, working your ass off, burning yourself out, cycling through again and again, success, failure, satisfaction, disappointment, and then start to level off, start to take better care of yourself, start to manage energy, start to find better mentors. And it's almost like a cliche at this point. But to the guy that's still in it, I need them to know there is a happy ending, but it still sucks right now.
Yeah. And I think an important part of that process is celebrating any wins.
Yes.
You have to do that, even if they're really small, like completing a course, celebrate it because that's something you have to reinforce yourself because you have to reinforce that belief in your system that this is necessary to learn because it's going to get into a better place. So therefore celebrate that win, make it a feel good moment, anchor that moment. This is really crucial to the process,
Yeah, I amen to that. And it's funny, I was talking this morning on a leadership call with Entre. We were talking about how people measure progress and thus what they define as a win.
Yeah.
And I think that the most dangerous temptation in life, in business, in the life of an entrepreneur is to attach progress to money.
Yeah.
Because then when you're making it, it means you're winning. And when you're losing it, it means you're losing.
Yeah.
And then that sucks because you always feel like you're starting over. But the reality is that's not the ultimate currency of entrepreneurial progress, I don't believe.
Mm.
It's experience, it's wisdom, it's influence. I mean, it's a lot of things. It's influence, it's network. You know, for example, I have a podcast called Millionaire Secrets, and I have a friend named Sir Marco Robinson, and I could lose all my money next year, but if we had a good moment, I now have an asset.
Yeah.
That I could call and say, hey, are there any opportunities? Like, you know, you're building so much more than just net worth through this journey. And when the more disciplined you can be about defining it that way from the outset, and I know it's hard because it's not what society tells you is what matters, the more wins there are to celebrate.
Exactly. And, but you know, when you're going through that journey as an inexperienced entrepreneur, you don't see them as wins. You see them as you know, I have to do that. That's like a barrier. But they're actually wins because every achievement is a win. Every something that you've done and achieved is absolutely a win. And like you said, you're building assets. So relationships are assets. Relationships are your greatest assets.
Yeah.
As you know, Jeff, you know, because they give you opportunities, and opportunities are the assets that give you growth in financial terms, and also how you can influence other people. And you know, the greatest fulfillment is how you can influence someone else to transform them from I don't believe I can do it to I've done it because of you. So that's an amazing thing, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's ultimately the greatest payoff there is. You know, they say no, I don't know, the greatest measure of leadership is how many other leaders you produce, right?
Yeah.
So let's keep the story going. So you kind of have to reinvent yourself again, get back together with your wife. I mean, your biography has such a laundry list of achievements, you know, whether real estate investing, restaurants, TV, travel, charity. How does the journey unfold, you know, kind of from where we left off? I really want to make sure we don't get to the end without hearing the whole story.
So 2008, I was very unhappy in the marriage. So the first thing I decided to do was basically get out of that marriage, but I'd been planning it for 5 years, but I hadn't had the idea. I hadn't got the financial clout to do it, and I wanted to do it properly. So my question was, right, how can I be successful again? I asked that question, but how can I make $1 million this year? And how can I, you know, basically have something where I can get loads of PR from it? So what I decided to do was write a book in 2008. And I called the book Close the Deal and Suddenly Grow Rich, based on my sales experience and what I'd done. Mm-hmm. And it took me 6 months to write the book. I got up at 4 o'clock every morning, wrote the book no matter what, because that was my way out of that marriage. That was the way out to make myself happy was the number one goal,
but,
you know?
By the way, like put a pin in that for a second for everybody listening. Talk about being innovative and creative. Writing a book as a strategy to exit an unhappy marriage. I just think we just need to acknowledge that as the genius idea that it is. So kudos.
I've never heard it put that way, Jeff, before. That's amazing.
I mean, if anybody's like a marriage counselor, sock that away as something you can advise for your patients. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was true. I mean, I got up when she was sleeping and went, roll the book like this. And long story short, got it edited, found a publisher. I don't know how I did it, but I found one. And it became a number one bestseller within like the first month of release on the bookshelves. And don't get me wrong, I did a lot of PR and stuff, but it became number one. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, I got really recognized globally for the first time, but it wasn't bringing in money. You know, book sales do not bring in money. So I said, right, how can I leverage this and create a business from it and make 7 figures in the next year? So I didn't want to do the seminar route and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, right, I thought of an idea. I said, it was 2008. It was after the subprime crisis. A lot of companies were desperate. Mm-hmm. So I said, right, how about I think of an incentive that I can sell to companies that can boost their sales a lot, but make it really cheap, but make it really valuable. So because I was in the holiday industry, I thought, why don't I contact hotels and see if they got any free rooms? So I contacted loads of hotels, I got loads of free rooms. And I said, listen, I'll send the customers to eat dinner there. Just give me the free rooms. And I put these rooms into a vacation incentive voucher, I called it, packaged it, and I sold that at $50 a go, but the company would have to buy 1,000. So I'd make 50,000 on a sale, and I wouldn't have to pay anything for the accommodation. So it was 100% profit.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll never forget the day, Jeff. My second sale was on Christmas Day, 2008, and I sold 10,000 vouchers to a retail electrical outlet, but they had 100 stores, and they were going to use
$500,000.
$500,000 in one day,
Yeah.
right? And we were going to use this incentive to sell their latest TV. Buy a TV, get a free holiday, right? Magical incentive, got the money. That was the day that everything changed. The next week I moved out, got an office, got my own place.
So this was after you wrote the book, you promoted the book, you made the book a bestseller, you used the clout from the book to go create this vacation incentive voucher program, closed a $500,000 deal. Incidentally, the book was called Close the Deal and Suddenly Grow Rich. So I assume the sequel is called Close the Deal so you can exit your marriage. Yeah. Because that's exactly what you did.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
Wow. Okay. I don't even know how I follow up that little nugget.
That's
right
very
there.
good, mate. You're the first person to ever think of it that way. I've never thought of it that way. So it's good to you, mate.
I'm a marketer and a copywriter by trade. I can't not find the gold in the story, but no, that's just so genius. Okay, so now, I mean, it sounds like that's a fresh start. I mean, you just rebooted your whole life. You got an office, you got a place, you got cash in the bank, you got free of a marriage that you felt constrained in, and I mean, the world's your oyster. Where do you go from there?
It was the happiest I'd ever been, and I was 40, so it was a big number that. And when I was coming to my 40th, it was like, oh, I'm not very happy about that. But when I wrote the book and got the business going, the age became irrelevant, because literally I was seeing 5 girls. I was having the time of my life. I was just going on holiday everywhere, making shitloads of money, living in a beautiful place. It was just amazing, and from that, it got bigger and bigger. But again, some things happened that I didn't anticipate. For example, I got people into my business that were not good for me and didn't help me expand it. And the business got copied like crazy. And we got the whole thing got marginalized because everyone started doing vacation incentives, right? Mm-hmm. So I had to stop that business, basically wind it down. And then I got into real estate because I started buying real estate in America in 2009 for like $30,000 for a single house. You know the time. And I was basically selling that to Asians who wanted to buy a house in America so they could live there eventually and things like that. So that became the new business model that did really well. And I got into property, and I wrote a book, became a #1 bestseller about property as well. So that was another little cycle that went on there.
And that was okay, was the travel company, was that Naked Travel?
No, Naked Travel came after all that.
After all that. Okay.
Yeah,
and I don't want to jump ahead. So you got real estate. And by the way, one thing I want to say real quick, and I've learned this as I've kind of grown and broadened my entrepreneurial perspective. And I think you have an advantage not being here in the United States. I'll say this, for those of us here in the United States, we have a tendency, this is one of the reasons the rest of the world loves us so much. Haha. We think that America is the entire world.
Yes, you do.
And we're myopic in that way. And so we fail to see all these opportunities that the rest of the world sees once you start looking outside of your borders. Yeah. So for you, you're like, oh, I can buy cheap property in America, but I don't have to wait for the American economy to recover to profit on that property. I could sell it to Asian buyers. Whereas an American investor, we forget that Asian buyers even exist, or we don't bother to go research it, and we just have to sit here and wait. I think that's a really important point, because a lot of my audience is American. Guys, gals, if you're out there listening to this, as an American who it took me 40 years to realize there are other countries in the world and they do business too, there is so much opportunity when you start thinking globally. And the internet makes it so easy.
Well, it does, Jeff, and you're absolutely right. But I was based in Asia. So for me,
Yeah.
everything that was my norm. You know,
Yeah.
I wasn't America. I'd hardly been to America, but I knew there was opportunities there because I did a lot of research to find out, shit, houses are so cheap there. There's an opportunity. And I just basically grasped it. And I didn't even buy the house. I kind of made an offer, but I sold it to an Asian buyer before I paid for it.
So you basically bought the contract, or you created a contract and sold the contract.
Yeah. And I did it through an email, just one email to my list.
Yeah.
I've got this house. Anyone want to buy it? Within 24 hours, someone will put a deposit down. Oh my God. You know, that's incredible, isn't it?
Okay. So I assume you did it again.
Of course. Yeah. So literally did it a lot. And I did property tours in America, took the people over there. And then I won the best real estate company, did People's Choice I think it was 2015. Yeah. Because I was getting my buyers the best returns from the property, looking after them well, stuff like that.
Okay. I mean, I don't even feel like I need to ask questions. The global question is just, tell us a really great entrepreneurial story. And I feel like the answer is to just ask you to keep talking.
Well, yeah, just follow my journey because there's so many stories within that life. And each one is different. And each one has its own lessons. I mean, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So those times were sunshine and rainbows. And then I opened my restaurant, Naked Restaurant, because I had all this freaking money. I always wanted a restaurant. I didn't open the restaurant to make money. I just did it for a hobby because it was like 100 meters from my house.
And where are you living at this time?
I was still in Malaysia. I was in Kuala Lumpur.
Okay.
So I was living in this kind of housing estate, bought this restaurant, called it Naked. I thought, fuck it, how can I get people there in a Muslim country? Called it fucking Naked. Because it's a bit dangerous, controversial, right? And literally hundreds of people showed up the first day, really enjoyed it. It won Tatler's Best Restaurant. And I had that for 7 years. I had that restaurant for 7 years. But what happened was something completely bad happened after this. And when I tell people this, they just cannot believe what happened. You know, everything was going amazing, restaurant, properties, and then in 2016, something really bad happened. Would you like to know what that is?
I'm ready for it. Yeah, edge of my seat, man.
So what happened was my cousin in England, who I'd known all my life, I went over to see my family stuff, said, listen, I see you doing well in property. Would you like to do a joint venture with me? And of course, because he's family, you have this filter.
Right.
Like, what the fuck am I doing? It doesn't matter because the family, right? Trust them. Oh, yeah. So bought this property, did well in the first one. We bought, I think it was 4, and it was multi-dwelling residential properties. And then we bought the 4th one in 2016, 51 apartments in Manchester, city centre, paid about, I think, $7 million for this property, right? We got the keys, and on the outside of the walls, the fire cladding started falling off. Now, there's a building in England called Grenfell. You may have heard of that in the USA, but I don't think you might have.
Wait, is this the one that like refracts light? No, okay, it's a different story. Sorry, go ahead.
It was a big tower block in London that basically burned down and killed 70 families because the fire cladding was combustible.
Oh, okay.
And the fire cladding on all state tower buildings in England is all combustible. But the government covered it all up. Now, I bought this building before that happened, before that event happened. And I knew if I put people in that building, right, the risk to their lives would be too much. I couldn't do it. So I was paying a bridging loan of $100,000 a month, and I couldn't get any income from it. And it was going for 6 months, and then I had to start paying.
And you couldn't refinance it without tenants in the building.
Couldn't refinance it. Yeah. And I had to pay the lawyers. And then I found out my cousin had been embezzling money out of my company while I was in Malaysia, and his mum, my auntie. So I had to deal with that. I had to get forensic accountants in there to do all the accounts properly, right? And I was suing eight people: developer, building inspector, building regulation, building insurers, surveyor, bank, God knows what. Now you can imagine the legal fees here we're talking about. So eventually what happened is the bank repossessed the building because he went into receivership. Because it wasn't right paying 100 grand a month for a building we couldn't even monetize.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to go against the bank because the bank did it not to the contract. So anyway, cut a long story short, I sued all these people. It cost me millions, Jeff, not just in the legal fees, but in the lost opportunity because I couldn't sell any more property in this litigation.
Right.
Because if I said to my investors, well, I've got this property, but we're in a litigation, investors aren't going to come and buy with you, right?
Right.
So it cost me millions and I won. I won every single lawsuit, but English law ain't like American law. You don't get punitive damages, right? You get literally, you win it and you don't get any compensation. You get a win in the court, goes in your favor because the developer went bankrupt, right? And then the insurance paid for some of the repairs of the building, but the bank owned it, had to sue the bank, and the bank came after me and my personal assets, including my mum's house, right? They were very, very ruthless, very horrible. And what I had to do is I had to do a social media campaign against the bank and expose what they were doing, because they actually sold the building to another developer without telling them about the fire damage and what the fire cladding. So I got it on video and proved it in court, and then the bank stopped, and I got some money from the bank, but it wasn't nowhere near enough from what I'd lost. But there was a point during that time where I thought about killing myself because it was just so bad, because the bank was posting a load of shit about me online. They were going against me. Literally, Jeff, it was fucking horrible, right? It was horrible. And that took me 4 years. 4 years of my life to fight. And if I'd not fought, I would have lost everything. So I fought it, got out of it literally just before the pandemic. And then in the last year, I've been paying mentors a lot of money to teach me how to do online. And my online business now is doing really well. And that's what I'm doing because, I've had to learn new things. I wanted to do that anyway, but I guess I did it sooner because of the pandemic. So that's literally the last 5 years of my life have been the hardest of my life.
Wow. Yeah. It's funny, like when somebody's telling a story of hardship, we all kind of reach a point where we have to laugh. It's like, oh, you got to learn to laugh. And as you were telling that, I felt this instinct to like laugh with you. And then I'm like, wait, I don't know if Marco's laughing yet. So I don't know if I should laugh. It's crazy. And it's funny because I think society tends to, and I don't know how much this is real and how much this is just a perception, but there's this idea that what we revere is people when they're on top.
Yes.
But what we relate to is people when they're in the firefight. And so I think for a lot of people that are starting businesses or scaling businesses or, pivoting businesses in the online world where exposure becomes, really the currency, how big of an audience and how much awareness and attention am I getting? There's this feeling that, oh, well, if anybody's going to respect me, I have to make it look like I'm on top.
Yeah.
And I think there's a naivete to that the reality is especially if people are looking for someone they feel like they can trust, it's more about who they relate to than who they iconically revere. And that's where the transparency, of saying, look, here's where I'm at. It doesn't mean ups and downs don't mean you're not a great entrepreneur. In fact, ups and downs pretty much define a great entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think people respect people respect the entrepreneur that's had the greatest fight.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Oh, it totally does, because you could put a few billionaires up on a Mount Rushmore, and the ones that get the most respect are not going to be the ones that are the richest.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't even want to name names, but I mean, if I just you know what, who cares? I'll say some names. If I say Elon, like the richest guys that come to mind, right? Like a Elon Musk, a Jeff Bezos, a Mark Zuckerberg, and like a Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs isn't in the same league net worth wise, but in terms of like impact and station. And I say, which one of those do you guys respect the least?
Yeah.
I guarantee you 99% would say Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Because he kind of stumbled into it. And when he was in college, it doesn't mean he wasn't a smart kid. Doesn't mean he didn't have a good idea. Doesn't mean he wasn't scrappy. But he doesn't have that same journey of like gladiator level warfare to get where he got,
Absolutely. Yeah. And the person I respect most is Jobs and Elon, probably. I mean, probably Jobs more because of the gladiator way he went about things. He lost everything and, got fired from his own company, etc.
Yeah, I would agree. Even Elon, I mean, I think if people really understand that story where, he was kind of right place, right time with PayPal, he happened to enroll in Stanford in the middle of Silicon Valley, right at the time the .com thing was happening. Doesn't mean he wasn't smart or didn't have a good idea. Sold PayPal to eBay. I think he made $180 million in that transaction, was his personal take. And if people really understood and could imagine what it was like to take $180 million and over the next few years, bet every single one of those dollars on a new speculative idea to the point where he basically didn't keep anything to even pay his own rent.
Yeah.
If people understood that, I think they would see him the way that we see Steve Jobs,
Yeah, I think they would. Yeah.
But no, man. So, I mean, honestly, just incredible props to you. I mean, the world, it's funny. You started off the interview talking about snowflakes, right? And, that's a political term here, at least in America, that's a very politicized term. And,
I know it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And you probably meant that. You probably did that on purpose, but the term, I think what you're really saying is people that are more addicted to comfort than experience.
Yeah.
Would you agree? I mean, is that a reasonable way to define it?
Yeah. And, snowflakes just give up at the first hurdle.
Yeah. They just want to be comfortable.
Yeah. They don't want it hard. They don't want anything hard.
Yeah.
They want it to be on the plate.
And it's not and they're just waiting to be offended by but mostly because something is challenging or, ruffles their comfort feathers. And I think that for 99 here's why I think that's so negative and damaging. As human beings, I don't think we're biologically designed to be comfortable. Because assuming you believe in evolution, for 99.9% of human existence and human evolution and epigenetics that get passed down from generation to generation, being comfortable wasn't the gig. Like that wasn't how most people lived. And so we are designed for, adaptation to stress. That is actually how we grow and evolve. And if I could do anything in this world, it would be to drop a giant Nagasaki-sized nuclear bomb on the idea that comfort is even a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think comfort is a slow, stagnant death march.
Yeah, I think it creates a lot of apathy in whatever you're doing. Sure,
Yeah. So I mean, kudos to you for really living, man. What an inspiring story. By the way, if you're comfortable, you're not inspiring anyone.
Totally, yes.
Right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So before we get to the end, because I know we only have a few minutes left, I gotta say, I mean, you have so much we could talk about, but this idea that's just caught my eye, that you somehow have figured out a way to use blockchain to try to tackle homelessness. It may be a detour in the conversation, but I've just got to ask, can you share about that? It sounds so interesting.
Yeah, what I found is that if you take the charity world, right? Now, you and I know, Jeff, that the charity world is a massive way to basically make a lot of money, right? Because when you send a donation, you don't know where the hell it's going. There's no transparency at all, right? And I discovered that 90% of the money is lost in the organization and siphoned away. It doesn't even reach the people that it's supposed to reach.
Right.
So blockchain technology came along and thought, right, that's a way of leveling the playing field, because you can send a currency to a person without a third party. They get exactly what you're sending. And there's an indelible technology, a single ledger that you cannot fuck with it, basically. It's,
right.
It's there. You can't prove, you can prove every transaction on it. So I thought, why not do a charity with using blockchain where people know there's going to be cost to the charity, people know there's going to be cost for the staff, but most of the money gets to the person that need it. So for me, that's the way you do charity. And what I found is that when I did my TV show on Channel 4 called Get a House for Free, where I gave 3 houses away and paid the mortgage off, I discovered that there was a huge social housing problem in America as well as England and a lot of other countries. Because you look at Skid Row. I mean, Skid Row is still there. There's a massive problem, and the problem is not. It's definitely systemic, but it's actually to do with education, and it's making education accessible, like you have with Entre. So, what I found is I started a hostel in Barcelona, and we took people off the street, but we got companies to sponsor them on a monthly basis, like IBM, Pepsi, people like that, for like €300 a month. And we would educate them. We would basically educate them in the career that they knew if there was opportunities, or we would give them a new education in a micro business or a new career that there was opportunities. We've had 100% success rate. That means that nobody that we took off the street is now in that hostel after the education platform. They're all successful, they've all got jobs, or they've all started a business. And blockchain basically helps people that want to help know that they're helping them directly. It doesn't get siphoned off. So that's what that's all about.
Wow. Well, I would love to talk to you more about the educational process in that flow. Obviously that's my world and that's my passion. You know, if I could, because we're, here we are at the end, if I could just sum all that up, I mean, the innovation and the creativity and the willingness to take measured risk to consistently recover and it's not even, I don't even think of it as recover. It's to progress to the next chapter, to iterate, is so transparent in your story. And it's so lacking in snowflake culture. They don't adapt because, adaptation is the response to stress. And if you reject the idea of stress, you eliminate the possibility of adaptation. And I feel like you've demonstrated the polar opposite of that.
Yeah, then it becomes about the state. We're talking about the Democrats. It becomes about the state. It becomes relying on the state, not relying on yourself, right? So that's what now the world's turning into. We're not going to go into that.
Right. Yeah, it's not a political podcast, but yeah, I will say Entre, I mean, my business, my world, my reason why I do what I do professionally is all around self-reliance, independence, self-determination. I think the idea, my therapist taught me something that changed my life. He said, all forms of dependency ultimately breed hostility.
Oh, that's so good.
And when he said that, he planted a seed that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make people less dependent on other people and more dependent on great principles.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic, mate. Really good.
Yeah.
Say that again. All forms of dependence.
All forms of dependency eventually breed hostility.
Got it. All forms of dependency eventually breed hostility. Good, I use that. I'll credit you for that.
Credit to my therapist, Steve. Marco, I never even got to ask. Before we wrap, I just got to ask, how do you become a sir? How does somebody become Sir Marco?
So what happened was I was in Malaysia and I discovered that there were 350,000 blind people that were not allowed to have a guide dog, or even if they did have one, to take it out into public places. That was the law because of the Muslim religion stigma against animals, especially dogs. They weren't educated that blind people needed an animal to look after them. They didn't really make sense, right? So what I did is I got a guide dog, bought it from China. Cost me $15,000 for this guide dog because guide dogs are really, really clever. They can hold the bladder for 6 hours. They're unbelievable animals, right? And then I filmed this blind man using the guide dog, going onto public transport, trains, buses, taxis, going into shopping malls, and being refused entry everywhere that he went. And we got it on tape. We got, held at gunpoint in one shopping mall because we kept going back in all the time, just to annoy them, right? But we did it for the film, and we called the film, Are You Blind? Put it on Facebook. It got 15 million hits in a week. The blind community was so outraged, they went nuts, right? because it was a travesty, because these blind people couldn't leave their houses without a member of the family taking them somewhere. Talk about dependency, right?
Yeah.
So that got like a huge amount of attention, and the Malaysian government and the Malaysian king contacted me and said, listen, Marco, you've embarrassed us. We don't know what to do. They said, but we didn't understand the importance of guide dogs, so we're going to change the laws, and we're going to make it law now that those guide dogs can actually, blind people can actually use guide dogs and be allowed everywhere into public places. And I said, that's amazing of you to do that. Thank you so much. And they said, we'd like to recognize you for that by knighting you for charity and philanthropic purposes for the country. So Malaysia is a Commonwealth country that belongs to the Queen and all that kind of stuff, right? The same kind of dynasty. So that's how I got knighted.
Wow. I'm glad I asked, man. What an amazing story. What an amazing note to end on. When I talk about how entrepreneurial skills and entrepreneurship and learning, whether it's marketing or business or operations or how to transfer belief to people, all this whole cluster of skills that we teach through the frame of entrepreneurship is really, and I'd say this is actually where the rubber meets the road if you want to impact the world. That story, you just nailed it, man.
You said, like Maslow's hierarchy, philanthropy is the tip of the spear. That's where you got a legacy.
Mm-hmm. And how can the world go get more of you, of you mentioned you're doing business online. Like, let's send the world your way. Tell them where to go. Just
go to my Instagram account. That's where all my people come. So it's Marco Robinson Now.
Okay.
Marco Robinson Now.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
The thing with real estate is that there's so many different niches and there's so many different things that you can do, from commercial to resale residential. You need to find that niche that you want to focus on.